This is Robert Capuccio. Welcome to the Self-Help Antidote, a weekly dose of reason, perspective, and insight, where we challenge conventional thinking and explore authentic strategies and insights around personal transformation. Our commitment to you is to bring you some of the world's leading experts in the domains of fitness, wellness, coaching, and behavior change, separating fact from fallacy. Sophie Thomas, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited because the person who introduced the two of us, John Hardy, he is the founder and CEO of Faster UK. Every single person he has ever introduced me to, no pressure here, we've gotten on like a house on fire and absolutely love them. And, in a lot of cases became lifelong friends. Not like I'm expecting all of that from a conversation, but just given John's track record, I was really excited to have this conversation. So a little bit of background on you. You are the author of the book Fitlosophy, which incorporates fitness-based practices with psychology, understandable, and interestingly enough, philosophy. So I remember one of my mentors, he was on stage and he said, 20% of anything you'll ever do is knowing how to do it. 80% is getting yourself to do it. And a lot of times, I don't know where people pull those stats from. I doubt that was evidence-based, but it was an interesting statement. I think a lot of people can relate to that. I have a general idea about what to do. Now, getting myself to do it and then doing it with long-term adherence, that's a different story. So for you, where did those three domains of fitness, psychology, and philosophy intersect?
That's a really great question. Thank you, Bobby. And it's funny because people are always like, wow, philosophy, why philosophy? And one of the first things I actually say to people to give them a bit more framework, because philosophy is easy to think of all these lofty, unreadable tomes, which in many ways it is. But philosophy, as I say to them, is essentially the grandfather of psychology. Philosophy is the attempts of understanding human behavior and the human condition just without the lab coats or the statistical analysis. And actually, when you look at, I wouldn't say that they're evidence-based psychologists, but they put psychology on the map in regards to how to treat a human being in front of them. Individuals like Freud and Jung took so much from philosophy in attempting to understand humans, in attempting to change their behavior. And hopefully that puts the framework into people's minds as to how philosophy not only can inform psychology, but it basically inspires so much of the basis for how we try and understand human behavior.
A lot of what we call psychology is birthed out of philosophy.
CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, otherwise known as CBT, which is sort of the gold standard, at least in the UK, for treating anxiety and depression. It was formulated by an individual who thought stoicism is a pretty great idea. Let me just put it into something quantifiable and with metrics that I can measure. And that's essentially what CBT became to be. Even dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, another form of treating ailments and mental health difficulties, it came from, a lot of it is inspired by Eastern philosophy and the metrics of Eastern philosophy. So it's funny how we take for granted how not only do we use philosophy in our medical day-to-day life in terms of how we treat certain mental health ailments or difficulties interpersonally, but on everyday statements, everyday decisions. Why do I have breakfast at this time and not that time? Why do I hate getting out of bed? Why do I like this exercise? What does it give me? Even the statement philosophy is useless is a normative statement. It's a descriptive and normative statement, which uses philosophy to create that statement. So I do emphasize to people that we use philosophy in our lives a lot. And I have a brief background in philosophy in terms of studies. And when I was younger, I found it gave me a lot of support and understanding myself when I was at an age when I couldn't really. And at the time, I hadn't reached that point in my life where I got into psychology. And at the time, I was also incidentally becoming a coach, getting into training, taking up different sports, lifting, powerlifting, etc. And I realized that there were times in my sessions where I was lacking a sort of meaning or lacking a certain drive as to why I was doing something beyond tracking my macros, beyond looking at specific weight loads or reaching a 1RM. And it just wasn't enough for me. It wasn't touching the sides. So at the same time, when I was picking up bits and pieces and ideas from these thinkers, from these philosophers, be it someone like Marcus Aurelius, be it someone like Albert Camus or Friedrich Nietzsche, I realized actually, hang on a second, this is really helping me understand the reasons why I get up really early in the morning or go to gym before work or go to gym after work when I really don't want to. And it inspired, I suppose, a certain flame that triggered these behavioral cues. And that's when I started to realize I could implement this or try to actually make the theoretical more practical for my clients. So it came from there. And then I wrote the book over lockdown because at that point, there was only so much Zelda I could play. And I was like, right, I need to make this more practical.
Well, that's arguable, actually. But what do I know? I've never played Zelda. But so what I'm hearing is essentially that both philosophy and psychology are an introspective exploration into why we do the things that we do. Philosophy started to incorporate more quantification and eventually neuropsychology, a bit more neuroscience, neurobiology into enriching our understanding, maybe expanding and deepening our understanding of human behavior. So if psychology smoked a pipe, it would be philosophy.
if it took some MDMA, it would suddenly become this transmogrified rainbow figure of this Grecian philosopher. That's how I like to think of it.
Oh, I was thinking it would probably just like become my friend Ravi. Okay, but yeah. So where was I? Anyway, so MDMA.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier CBT and DBT. What is some of the main distinctions and the important distinctions around dialectical behavioral therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy?
So that's a really, really cool, interesting question, and one that is really relevant to humans training. I was about to say clients, but we all train and we all face difficulties in training. So cognitive behavioral therapy, as the name suggests, is looking at your thought patterns, your cognitions. So something that I might be doing this podcast and in my head suddenly I get this thought that pops up. Oh, I feel really I'm not thinking, oh, I don't think I'm doing very well. And then I start to trigger a feeling based on that thought. I feel very self-conscious. And then a behavior that's sort of seeded as a result of the thought and feeling might be that I become more introverted. I stumble my words more. I don't feel as passionate or as present as I do in the discussion that I'm talking about. And cognitive behavioral therapy aims to kind of look at the root cause, the thought patterns, and challenging them. So this is, for instance, if I were to say, oh, I don't think I'm doing very well on a podcast, it might be that I come in and say, well, what evidence do I have for that? And I suddenly realize that my brain is basically being a dick to me. And I'm thinking, well, hang on a second, you don't necessarily have evidence for that. What counter thoughts can we create in this pattern just to interrupt it? So the feelings become less intense and therefore my behaviors are more adaptive. So cognitive behavior therapy attempts to aim to change the way we think, essentially, when it comes to negative distortions or very exaggerated negative thoughts about our behaviors or ourselves.
So thoughts influencing feelings,
yeah.
Feelings influencing behaviors. And then we start to create a narrative around why things are the way they are.
Exactly, okay. Because it becomes, I guess, self-fulfilling prophecy is not necessarily the correct term, but it becomes a vicious cycle whereby sometimes the feelings are before the thoughts and the thoughts are sometimes before the feelings. There's a lot of interesting research suggesting some people are genetically disposed to feel things first before the thoughts. And the cycle is similar. And this is where dialectical behavioral therapy comes in, because DBT aims to tackle the feelings portion. So let's say I have a very emotional response to something rather, what one could interpret as being rather minor. Let's say I get some very valid and constructive criticism from my boss or from a loved one, from my spouse. And my immediate reaction is either like absolute distress, absolute upset, potentially anger, a very, very exaggerated response to something that actually is, one, good for me, but also, two, is not necessarily interpreted in the lens of other people who don't feel as much as something as being a, quote, big deal. So DBT aims to tackle that moment of intense emotion, be it through physical means, even meditation means, practical means, such as, 5 sense grounding could be, what do I see? What do I touch? What do I smell? These things just to ground me a bit more and to dilute that emotion. And then once that emotion is dealt with temporarily, we can start to use those CBT methods to tackle the thoughts that also come in. So it's very interesting. We have two different approaches according to the individual struggles, the individual needs. And this is actually very apt for humans who struggle with training, right? Because there could be a human who, let's say, this is not me putting on my psychologist hat. This is me putting on my layman's term Sophie hat. Let's say you have a human who feels more, who's just a more feely person, more sensitive person. And let's say they go to the gym and they are, they're getting on with their, I'm using the gym as an example, but obviously you do not have to go to the gym for training, but just for this example, they're having a great time in the squat rack and suddenly someone, they go off to get some water and someone else comes in and intervenes, takes the squat rack from them. A total crime in gym etiquette, no, but nonetheless, not necessarily.
Big violation.
It's a huge violation, of
course. Out of bounds indeed. But something that would obviously annoy you to a certain degree, but something you could walk off and you could chat to about your friend, being like, God, he was a bit of a dickhead, wasn't he? But this person comes in and feels intense annoyance, intense distress, intense anxiety towards this activity. So for that human, it might be about, okay, when you're in that moment, how can we dilute that emotion? How can we distract you from that emotion? So then you can start to come in with the cognitive reframes to help you feel more settled. And then you have someone who might go into the gym, and classic case of gym anxiety, or they walk into the gym and their brain or their mind rather is flooded with thoughts of, I'm not good enough. I'm really anxious. What do people think of me? Do I look good in this? What am I like when I exercise? Looking in the mirror thinking, God, I look bad. All these thoughts, which then lead to feelings, which then lead to more maladaptive behaviors. So for that human, it might be more tackling the thoughts that they're experiencing when they walk into the gym. So it's a really nice metric to see that these two modes of psychology both aim at improving one's well-being, but through different means, because obviously thoughts are different to feelings and feelings are different to thoughts. What I like about this, what I'm noticing in this conversation, reminds me of a conversation I had yesterday, in fact, where I was sitting in a cafe in Hollywood with a highly accomplished coach. And she said to me, well, what methodology of coaching do you use? I thought, that's an interesting question. Who's the person sitting in front of me? Because coaching by nature, to a degree, is non-directive. And what I'm hearing, Sarah, or what I believe I'm hearing you say, is there are so many influences on our behavior that are all mutually reinforcing. In some cases, thoughts will profoundly affect our feelings. In other cases, our feelings, which is probably our biochemical awareness of emotions, will affect our thought patterns. And possibly behaviors could even affect thoughts and or feelings. So it's really a matter of awareness and understanding that one tool doesn't work for everybody in every situation. You have a lot of tools based on context being supreme here and how you utilize those tools. Well, that's the key to, or the lock on, your ability to thrive or languish in any given situation. So
absolutely.
When you wrote your book, what was some of the responses that you heard? People reading your book and going, okay, you know what? This occurred to me, or I never realized this, what was a barrier, or you know what? This changed my entire life and the way I relate to my fitness goals.
Yeah, so I think what was funny, a couple of my common responses was, I didn't know philosophy could be that fun, which is obviously very common. And that was one of my aims of the book, to make philosophy engaging, because trust me, I love Kant, I love his philosophical ideas, but good luck trying to read him and having fun with it. Like, I believe there's one page where it's one sentence without a stop. Feels like you can read the poor man not breathing whilst he's, telling you about doing onto others as what you wouldn't, or doing onto yourself as what you would do to others, etc. It's quite comical. So what I really wanted to do is to funnel the core concepts from these philosophical worldviews and thinkers, make it into a way that was enjoyable, but also practical. Because there are some philosophies which are really fun mental games, mental gymnastics, just playing around with these cool concepts. Are we living in a simulation? But you have to think about how that applies to people's everyday life, their lifestyle changes, their habit changes. And so that's leading into your question about, what people can take away from it for themselves. Is when I wrote the book, I made it hopefully pretty explicitly clear that every single individual has a certain, an individual, depending on their context, of course, has a certain framework or a certain worldview or style of attaining a habit or goal, which will be different to them. So, for instance, in the book, I talk about different philosophers' approaches to worldviews and concepts. So, for instance, a Kierkegaardian Fitlosopher, as he's one of my favorite philosophers, so I will be discussing. I thought I'd shine him in there. Will be someone who's more values based and approach their fitness routine based on what their fitness routine or their health routine, the general lifestyle routine, means when it relates to what they value. Like, do I value health? Do I value longevity? Do I value energy? Whereas someone who's a Marxist philosopher based on Marxism, which is very much a rigid dialectical exploration of history, which is very numerical, very materialistic, not in the sense that we talk about, for instance, glitz and glamour, but very material way of understanding the world. That person might thrive on looking at numbers, statistics, data, and thinking, how am I improving? How am I getting anywhere? And the idea was to collate these different worldviews and approaches to people's well-being while saying, hey, if you're finding yourself going a bit too extreme in the data analysis, or if you're, on the other hand, finding that you're not having enough structure, here are some other philosophers who interpret the world differently that you can almost wear that hat and try it. So the emphasis is hugely on self-exploration, understanding the self, and understanding that you might not look the same as someone else, and that's more than okay. And that has been the primary feedback as well from people when they've said things like, you know what, it's been nice to know that I haven't been forced on a certain way that has to be the right way to achieve well-being or achieve my health and fitness goals, that there's my way I can achieve. And that's okay, because if I'm thriving and doing well in it, then who's to say that I should change to a different sort of worldview? And that was something that I was happy to hear upon reception.
You're speaking my language. That is why this podcast is called The Self-Help Antidote, because very often in self-help, there is a suggestion, maybe not explicitly, but there is an implicit assumption that there is right thinking and wrong thinking, and there is a right way to view the world and engage in the world. And if you're not engaging with it that way, well, you're the source of your problem because you're engaged in wrong thinking. And I dispute that ideologically, and I dispute that empirically. There's not a lot of empirical evidence to support that.
Yeah.
How do let's say I've been struggling with a fitness goal, and I hate to break fitness goals down to this, but weight loss per se. And I understand that to a degree, the results that I'm experiencing are influenced by the habits I develop or fail to develop. How do I understand my individual approach to successful habit creation versus somebody else's? How do I unpack that?
And I completely agree with you first off. And I do think, as you say, sometimes with these so-called self-help channels or self-help programs or books, there is, again, it's not explicit, but there is almost an undercurrent of shaming where, it's saying if you can't get up at 5 a.m. for an ice bath, then, well, you're a loser. That kind of thing, which again is not in keeping with the literature or not in keeping with what the research suggests. But it sells, it's glitzy, it's easy to create viral videos, right? And that then gets shared and then that gets promoted and people assume it's well-being for them. So with regards to your question on how to unpack how an individual can kind of not dismiss these voices, because again, if a 5 a.m. ice bath it works for you, then a 5 a.m. ice bath works for you, but how they can ground themselves in knowing that their route is the one that is successful and adaptive for them, I would suggest is try and make it as quantifiable as possible. So in my book, I talk a little bit about this in the chapter about the Socratic Fitlosopher. And actually, I want to credit John Hardy and Faster Function as well for inspiring this section, because Faster do a really great job of helping you understand the human in front of you, as opposed to, here is a personal training program. You will apply it to every single client on the planet. And one of the methods that they taught us was this why, so method, where you're asking a client, why do you want to lose weight? You know, why do you want to do it this way? So you can get to this, or so what happens after, this kind of dialectic, Socratic thinking, because I put it in the Socratic chapter. And the idea behind it is for the individual to unpack why they would be doing a certain habit or why they're doing a certain routine. And then unpacking that even further to understand, so you can get to a certain place, so you can have this long-term, slightly intangible goal, perhaps, that's a bit more holistic than your average. I just want to lose 5 pounds. I would suggest people make this kind of, I guess, a personal chart or personal metric, because then you can start to make it more tangible in your mind, so it's easier to follow and replicate. But also, if you have something set and concrete, then you can easily see how far you are away from it. I imagine it as like a darts board. Let's say you have a big why, so, and you defined them, and you chuck that in the middle of the darts board. And the darts represent your behaviors. You can then start to see, as each dart gets flown on the board on each day, each week, on a more long-term scale, how far that dart is away from your personal values, your personal why. And then you can start to get an idea of, okay, yeah, and then you can start to think, okay, I'm really far from this center. What can I do for myself that I know has worked in the past for me to get to these personal goals that I know is for me? And it just acts as a great anchor when it feels very overwhelming, because sometimes these self-help advice, as you say, it's generic and it's so hard to quantify. So if you can create your own little personal metrics for how close you are to what is personal success for you, then it becomes much easier to be grounded in what you know works. Like, for instance, if I were to say, like, okay, like I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, why do I want to get to this certain belt? Well, it represents X for me. I know that undergoing the skill development of the sport will obviously improve my brain health, my mental well-being. And then I'll list these here. And then let's say I've not been training for 2 or 3 weeks because life. Then I can start to see, okay, well, my whys for that goal, I'm behaving in a way that's slightly far away from that goal. Cool. Now I know where I'm at. I have the data. I can act accordingly. And it's much more solution orientated rather than coming from a place of shaming. Much more productive.
Well, what I'm hearing here, one of the things I do for work is I work with a leadership team. I guess you can call that leadership or executive coaching. And each week or most weeks we meet, there's an assignment. But it's not really an assignment, because when you say, well, here's an assignment, it's like, okay, well, how do I get this right? No, it's not about getting it right or wrong. It's about the exploration. So we call them experiments, because when I'm conducting an experiment, I'm not expecting to get it right or wrong. I'm curious to learn what happens when I do this. So what I'm hearing is it's experimentation, because that incorporates wonder, it incorporates curiosity, and there's an element of play. So if I set out to do something and that does not occur, I don't run through all of those thought patterns that would lead me to need CBT, but rather I go, oh, wow, isn't that interesting? And if we were to break it down into steps, tell me if I'm on point or I'm probably going to miss something. Step number 1 is you need a model. You need a framework, because otherwise you cannot quantify any result. So you need a framework. You need to understand your intrinsic motivation, right? The why, so. You need to have a plan of action. You need to be able to evaluate the result and then experiment with different courses of action to see, okay, is this getting me closer or further? I think if there was a step 6, what are the distinctions? Looking back, and that's what a model does, I can't discern distinctions. So probably the difference between a ritual and a behavior. A behavior is, I'm going to go for a walk every morning. Well, that's great. A ritual is every morning at exactly 6 a.m., I will walk for 30 minutes at this rate of perceived exertion along this path. And if something doesn't work out, I have all of these variables now to look back and go, okay, well, to what degree was I successful? What were the people, the parameters, the planning, the emotions that might have supported that? And what didn't work out? and ask myself the same question in response to that. So that's how you would have those 6 steps. I'll run through them one more time of what's your model, what's your intrinsic motivation, what is your plan, behavioral plan, what actions are you going to take, how do you evaluate, experiment, and then discern what worked, what didn't.
Absolutely. You've nailed actually how I've articulated it in the book. And what I really like about that, essentially, a classification of a new fitness habits model we've created apparently on the spot. It's perfectly encapsulated the reasons why I chose philosophy and psychology, because within that design of that model, that framework, you've incorporated the normative, so trying to understand the human condition, why we do the things we do, but also the quantitative. Now, philosophy is wonderful. It's one of my favorite things to study and pore over, but it's not necessarily quantifiable, which is where psychology can support us. We need both philosophy and psychology to, in my view, to better understand ourselves. Psychology helps us with the quantifiable, the metrics, to, again, that experimental scientist mode where we're looking at the data and acting upon it. So with that framework you've suggested, you've come up with, which was actually really impressive, because it's literally what I put in Fitlosophy, which was awesome.
We should patent it. It could be like the SOBOB methodology or the BOSO, but that sounds a little bit too much like BOSU, and I don't want to get David Weck upset with me. He's a good mate. So
that's true.
Maybe we'll go with SOBOB. Actually,
SOBOB I like. I like SOBOB. SOBOB. That's SOBOB. It's and it is SOBOB. It creates that. It galvanizes us with data, and you have the qualitative, the more descriptive, which is us thinking about, oh yeah, I do this sometimes. Sometimes I feel this when I do this. That's really interesting. What can I do to feel less this? And I wonder why I feel like that. That's cool. That's there. But what's important is having the data. So those experimental moments, like you would with any model, any research methodology, you have the data and you act accordingly. And that's kind of what I try and encourage the reader to do in my book. And, I'm saying it's totally fine if this isn't working for you right now, because, life is not some linear block. And that's what people mistake science, right, to be this linear, non-movable thing. But science is a method. Science is a methodology. Science is about trying things out and, accepting when the data says this is this, and trying out something if the data is that and that. It's actually a very open-minded discipline, despite what some people...
Science has to be fluid and open by nature. Otherwise, it ceases to be science and it turns into dogma.
Exactly. So it's interesting when you have a lot of people arguing how dogmatic the scientific community are or researchers are. It's the polar opposite of what an individual in research should be. They have to be open-minded and actually, they have to take on the chin when the data is saying the opposite to what they found prior, thinking, oh God, okay, well, let's go with it. And that's kind of how I encourage the readers to be. I encourage them to be this data scientist or scientist, rather, to look at what's going on in their daily lives and thinking, okay, cool, this isn't really working, or this is making me feel a certain way. Let's try out some interventions to help me get to where I want to be based on the framework I've created for myself.
Okay, what I really enjoy there, because it not only creates a structure, but it also creates an archetype for me to step into because one thing that drives me crazy, and it doesn't drive me crazy because it angers me. It drives me crazy because it's like, it's so limiting, is, well, that's just not me. Well, first of all, there's not this one unified you. There are multiple versions of you. Let's not even get into that. You can kind of frame an archetype to step into. It's kind of like wearing a new suit until I get used to it. And then it does become very much me. But there's also, I'm probably being a bit redundant, there is a playfulness. I think that there is so much underlining accusations in the fitness industry, in the self-help industry. You're not guilty of anything. Play with it. And you see this. You see this when somebody, quote unquote, goes off their diet, or even the word they use, I cheated. So there was a person, usually me or a principal, that I I immorally, unethically betrayed over the weekend. And there's a story about that where if it was just, I'm just playing with outcomes and behaviors. It's like, oh, well, that happened. I learned when I'm in this environment, feeling this emotional state, maybe with these people, this is a possibility that emerges. What could I do in preparation or in the way I engage in this situation to kind of shift the behaviors and therefore alter the outcomes? That's not only more fluid, but it's a bit more fun because I don't have an identity-based statement on how bad I am. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting that you clocked on to the playfulness and asking those what-based questions, because there's some really interesting research regarding rumination and generalized anxiety disorder and OCD. So obviously, whilst this does not have to apply on a clinical setting to people who don't have the conditions, if someone is a ruminator or an overthinker, playful, again, very redundant, I'm taking off my psychologist hat, but in a more kind of generalized statement, if you find yourself overthinking a lot and you're constantly asking yourself, oh, why did I do that? Like, why did I slip off my diet? Why did I go training that day? You start to create that story. You start to create a dog pile of thoughts because you're trying to desperately answer that why. You're trying to find solutions when the answer is, well, you're human. Well, you're not a robot. Well, we are a wonderful neurobiological organism, which is massively impacted by external factors. But you don't think that when you're thinking a why, you're caught in the story. But replacing the why questions when you're in that space with what questions has been shown to be really effective because they're solution-based, they are optimistic, and they foster resilience, which
optimistic.
Exactly. I think optimism is a good way of, optimism is a solution-based way of looking at positivity. Because positivity, you can say, I'm happy no matter what. And optimism might be saying, okay, things might be feeling a certain way at the minute, but there's lots of solutions to working towards an alternative or lots of solutions to me feeling a lot better. It's a more grounded version of positivity in many ways. That's a really
good distinction. Optimism is a solution-based method of positivity.
Because I think sometimes positivity can feel quite nebulous. Just be positive. It can feel like, you're kind of like lost at sea. Someone's coming down to grab your hand, and instead of grabbing your hand, they high five you. Like, just be positive. Whereas optimism might be thinking, okay, you're stuck in the water. What can we do to get you out of the water? It's got a bit more structure to it. And actually, it's really interesting. Segueing a little bit from philosophy into psychology, although obviously there's a lot of writings on resilience that, funnily enough, from eons ago, match what the research is saying today, which is always makes me a bit giddy. But the research regarding resilience is not about this idea of like grit or grit actually is linked with resilience, but not this idea of overt discipline. It's really interesting because the term discipline doesn't actually have it's really interesting because discipline, don't get me wrong, I will use the term discipline interchangeably because I'm human and language is very fluid. We tend to use things that's commonly used in our vernacular, very normal. But in the clinical literature of psychology, there's no defined or agreed upon term for discipline because it's a rigid thing. Disciplined in what? Discipline is a noun in many things. It's a field of something. What is discipline? Rather, the clinical psychologists and social psychologists as well, they tend to look at the term resilience. Because resilience is a lot more quantifiable. Obviously, the researchers have got to try and measure ways so they can improve upon their methodologies. And quantifiable is the magic word. Resilience looks at the ways in which people adapt to stress or are able to bounce back from stress in a very layman's term. So that doesn't have to mean, being hard on yourself, self-shaming, self-loathing. In fact, that can make you less resilient because, again, it creates those stories which create either those behaviors or those feelings, or create this vicious cycle of negative thoughts, which then trigger the behaviors and feelings as well. Resilience is looking at ways of you being solution orientated, of being play orientated, of kind of looking at the mess ahead of you and thinking, okay, let me try and build something from this. Let me try and make lemonade out of lemons. And there's a freedom there which allows you to be objective and calm about the current situation you're in. And it's funny because some of the best methodologies of cultivating resilience actually require you to be self-compassionate. and actually requiring you to be self-compassionate in utilizing, emotional regulation techniques, in seeing what you're feeling and experiencing and acknowledging and accepting it. And it's so strange, I think, sometimes to see some of the self-help industry nailing this idea of you've got to be disciplined, you just don't want it hard enough. And actually, that's counter to what the literature says. And it's funny because having that softness, that slight softness and openness actually will get you to where you want to be without being a dick to yourself, basically.
It's incredible where a lot of this stuff comes from, because I read a lot of those posts. It's like, it's got to be hard, and you got to do the thing you absolutely don't want to do. And it's like, well, if what I'm doing is completely void of intrinsic motivation, like, why am I doing it in the first place? Like, my job sometimes is quite difficult, as I'm sure yours is. But the essence of what I do, I absolutely love it. So if I were to take your advice, I would find something that I absolutely hate to do. It's attached to no intrinsic value, and I would make myself do it because it's the hard thing. Or most people want the outcome, but they don't want to do the work. In other words, most people want what I have, but they don't want to be as absolutely awesome as I am to be so deserving. It's a game that you play with people who are frustrated and grappling and want to know that all of the variables around human behavior are not only understandable, but they're within my direct control, which both of those are highly suspect thought processes. So reading Brene Brown, as you do, came across something really interesting in Atlas of the Heart. And she was talking about being highly resentful at one stage in her life, and things that made her resentful. Somebody said, oh, this is good enough. I could stop working on this now. That was me in my early 20s. I was the person that you least would invite to a dinner party, because I would start to complain that all of the wine and the chit chat was getting in the way of discipline and hard work and what we could be accomplishing. Yeah, that's the guy you want there. And you have to ask, why was I like that? And, on one side, it's because, all right, yeah, he was a total tosser, and that would probably be correct. But on the other side, there's got to be a motivation. And she was meeting with this emotions expert for an episode, and they were kind of having chit chat like we did. And she asked them off the cuff, look, personal question. Resentment, that emerges from anger, doesn't it? Without hesitation, it's like, no, that's incorrect. It's envy. Resentment is a product of envy. So anytime somebody's like, you're not doing this, and it doesn't affect that. It's like, you don't work for them. Or it's like, oh, you're always playing that stupid guitar. And it's like, okay, well, why does that matter to you so much? You're an accountant. Does me playing the guitar 3 towns away when you're not even aware, does that somehow energetically in some quantum, because you can come up with any magical thinking, just put the word quantum in front of it. It's all scientific. But does that somehow in some quantum field interrupt your ability to account? I mean, what's the problem? They're envious. That is envy, because there's something that you're doing that they wish they could voice their need or their desire to do it. And when you so when you talk about that, I went off on a completely unsolicited tangent. I just want to acknowledge this for you and the listeners, because it lands with me, because so many of the conviction is not proof, and consensus is not truth. Just because a lot of people believe very strongly about something doesn't make it true. And normally, I mean, if you want to throw the Dunning-Kruger effect into the conversation, when you have a large group of people that believe something so strongly they cannot be swayed, they don't appreciate the nuance of dynamic complexity. You're probably not listening to expert opinions. You're listening to novice opinions. Not saying there's no truth to it, but the greater the expertise that somebody acquires, the greater context comes into play. You'll hear the words or the word "it depends" far more often.
I completely agree, which is also not, it's obviously for individuals who are interested or understanding of that nuance, because again, human beings are not black and white, linear robots. Why would anything related to human behavior be as cut and dry? But for anyone who understands that, it depends, there's an idea of, of course, it's multifaceted. But if you're a layman listener, it depends can come across as, I'm listening to this, I want something sexy, I want something juicier, I want an answer for these complex concepts.
I was in a panel discussion, and the expert sitting next to me had said something, and people thought that he was insulting the audience and downplaying adversity, when what he was really trying to say is the question you're asking is far more complex than you might think. In the 2 minutes I have allotted to give an answer, I'm afraid I cannot meet the depth and breadth of this question. And it wasn't dismissive. It was just, but people want to know, well, what's the answer? Well, first of all, I don't have an answer for you. You are the expert in your life, not me. And things do depend on context and the variables that go into that situation. Behavior is complex. I mean, if Robert Sapolsky starts off one of his latest books, Robert Sapolsky is one of my favorite neurobiologists in the world. And he starts off with, it's complicated. And he goes on to say, well, you better think real hard. You better be really careful before you think you understand what creates a certain behavior. And then he goes on, like speaking to the point we're making, especially if you have a negative connotation around what that behavior means. And it's like, well, I follow this person and they've got 80,000 followers on Instagram. What does Robert Sapolsky know about it? Well, quite a lot in comparison. You know, he spent his entire life studying something, and people who study human behavior like seek him out. So if everybody who's in the space is coming up with the same conclusion, where it's a little bit more complicated than you think, there's not a conspiracy there. These people didn't get into it because they had an agenda. These are the conclusions that they are making based on years of tested, duplicated empirical evidence.
And it's so funny, just harking back to that idea of envy and resentment. I do think, in conjunction with this idea of looking at an expert who, again, with their years of expertise or years of experience, years of diligent work in research, saying very fair and very, very accurate statements such as, well, it depends, well, it's nuanced, well, I can't sit here for 2 minutes and give you the TLDR of the entire history of neurobiology as a field. There's a sense of aggravation towards that. I feel that there's almost a sense of, not entitlement is coming across strongly, but there is an element of an individual demanding that their needs or questions be met or answered. And I think that's quite commonplace throughout that sense of that self-help industry, which, as you rightfully put it, people mocking people for not getting up at 5 a.m., people saying or claiming that, again, you just don't want it hard enough, or if you want to elevate yourself, this is what you have to do. There is a psychological pressuring there with none of the evidence. And I think it's very easy when social media is able to advertise these certain lifestyles coupled with these statements, because people are going to make that behavioral link between, oh, well, if I get there, if I do this, then I'll get there, even if it's unconscious. And I think that can be very challenging to navigate when you are an expert, because your time is being spent looking at the empirical data or formulating new theories that can potentially be tested later down the line. Your time is not being spent on these videos or on this new masterclass course or these concepts which sell very fast and very easily, but have none of the empirical depth or, philosophical questioning that can actually help us understand ourselves and be more at peace. Because I think when you understand that there is a nuance and a massive spectrum, it's not even a linear spectrum, it's just an amorphous galactic universal spectrum of what human behavior could manifest as, and not only the neurobiological components, but the socio-cultural components that go into the neurobiological components, and so on and so forth, once you understand there is a massive, large map there, you are much more forgiving of yourself. And again, that play comes back into it, where yes, you're listening to these messages, but you're understanding that yourself is requiring that self-compassion, therefore, which leads to that resilience, because you're understanding of why certain stressful environments might affect your behavior. But then you develop tools. And with these tools comes not only coping mechanisms, but as the research suggests, thriving mechanisms, where you are in a more open objective.
It's not about coping mechanisms, it's about thriving mechanisms. If my co-host, Tiffany Cook, were here right now, this conversation, but how? Like, when she would, point out that when somebody wants an explicit answer, they don't know. They're just seeking something because it's like, okay, I'm frustrated by this. I have a problem and I'm looking for a solution. So that's right. But how do you know the difference between something that's based on the research and something somebody is saying, especially if they have gotten a result by doing what it is that they are doing? I mean, even if they're an N value of 1, it's like they're still getting a result. And people kind of look at that where, like, an example would be someone in the gym who looks like their body should be on the cover of a magazine. And they're standing. I've used this a lot of times because I see this. And they're standing and they're doing horizontal adduction. So their elbows, if you can imagine almost like squeezing a big ball between your elbows, they're doing that movement just this one. They're listening, not watching this. And it's like, okay, well, what muscles are you training? And it's like, well, I'm training my chest. Well, okay, yeah, the movement might be correct, but the direction of resistance, you're standing holding a dumbbell. There's no way you're emphasizing your pectoral muscles. But somebody would say, well, look at their results. Their body's amazing. So you're talking about like anatomy, and you're talking about physics, and you're talking about like load lines. Well, how come you don't look as good as they do? And it's kind of like, because you have the Dunning-Kruger effect, well-meaning, colliding with the Dunning-Kruger effect. You have, okay, I don't know, so I'm seeking a simplified answer, and I'm seeking it from someone who is producing a result, but they're producing the result in spite of what they know.
It's correlation.
Rather than because of what they know. Yet they're doing a lot of things right, and there are certain universally applicable truths here. Okay, so if I am conscientious about what I'm eating, if I am conscientious about when I'm getting to bed, if I am conscientious about moving on a regular basis, barring a severe injury, you're going to get a much better result than somebody else. Now you add in age and genetic predisposition and that whole conversation, but that's kind of like, we look for that sound bite. Tiffany would go, okay, they're well-meaning. They need something. How do you know the difference between something that is pseudoscience and something that seems to have evidence to support it based on real science? And when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, well, maybe use CBT methodology, not as a form of therapy, but a way to navigate through the world. Use the Socratic method. Ask questions like, is this true? If this was true, why would it be true? Well, because this person's getting a result. Okay. Is it true in all circumstances? And for me, what would be the evidence to support that there might be something else that's also simultaneously true and more actionable? And it's just that playing with inquiry.
Absolutely.
As an immunity to advocacy.
Absolutely. And again, this is what many joys of philosophy comes in, whereby you are thinking, you are playing, you are toying with ideas, and you are questioning. One of the things philosophy can give us, as I talk about in the book, is a sense of what is valid and what is sound. What premises are logical, what premises are valid, what premises are sound. So we now have that a better understanding based on philosophy on how to evaluate these things through Socratic methodology, CBT stemmed from some of these discussions these philosophers were having. So through cognitive behavioral therapy means of open line questioning. So let's say we have these tools here. And going back, I'm jumping back because I think it's really relevant to this particular topic. Jumping back from when you created the SOBOB method, which is brilliant.
We created the SOBOB
method. Oh, thank you very much. The SOBOB model. So let's say we have this SOBOB model about creating a framework for this individual to play and experiment and be the scientist in their own lives, be the philosopher in their own lives about thinking about why they're doing certain things. There's going to be an individual out there with another certain framework or certain model. We could call it the guru model, that's an example.
Fair enough.
And the model might talk about things like stay hard, or if you don't want things, if you don't do this, you don't wanting it hard enough. All these aphorisms we've heard, let's say we stick them in the model. Both of these models are there side by side. And we look, and astonishingly enough, they both arrive to the same conclusion, the same outcome. Let's say this SOBOB model gets this individual to be exercising, be training enough, to be feeling really good. And this guru model is getting there. The stay hard model is going up there. And this individual is also training and exercising and getting these results. Now, again, if you incorporate the tools I talked about, the Socratic method, the lines of questioning, you can start to understand, okay, this person from model B got to this placard, got to this outcome. But these individuals, person A, person C, person D, person E, also got a similar outcome. Now, does this mean that the methodologies are equal despite getting the same outcome? No, because then you can start to pick apart each model, saying which ones are valid and sound, which ones are logical in their premises based on the empirical data and based on also the assumptions they make. Again, this is an Aristotle concept, but it's very useful for discerning what A to B is doesn't mean that B is A. So for instance, if all dogs are animals, doesn't mean that all animals are dogs, if that makes sense, that line of question, that line of logic. You can start to pick apart these models and start to think, this person's got the result, as you say, in spite of this. And if you are someone scrolling on social media or looking for coaching or an approach for yourself, that doesn't even mean you have to necessarily rule out model B. It could be that model B resonates with your individual personality traits, your individual way of being, but it just allows you to have choice in the way you question how that model got to the outcome, how person B got to the outcome. Because, for instance, there will be individuals who thrive with this model. But again, it's hard for individuals who are experts because they'll sit back and think, well, there's many factors that contribute to this person getting to the outcome. None of this is necessary because of stay hard, or if you don't want it hard enough, you don't want it, get up at 5 a.m. ice bath. These aren't causative, but they might play or resonate with this individual's personality, their external experiences, what they've experienced, how they take on board certain concepts, certain tropes, certain belief systems. All these complicated psychosocial elements play into how someone responds to a model. So it could be that model B, who's got the results, it might be that there's some merit to these claims despite the lack of empirical backing, simply because it plays to certain human behavior. Psychology is so vast and complex that you're going to get swathes of people who just happen to resonate with it. But then if you expose these same people to model A, they would also probably get similar results because they would find the methodology that worked for them. They'd play around with their data. And it might look similar to model B, but the beauty of it in this case, they are doing it off their own backs. They are investigating internally, psychologically, philosophically, what works for them. And that is very empowering because you're not at the behest of certain statements, certain aphorisms, certain marketing or business tropes. You're actually doing it for you, which I think is really empowering.
No, I completely agree. I think a lot of times you said at the behest of certain marketing, people who try to insist there is one methodology, they've either been indoctrinated, they have a low level of expertise to discern complexity, or they're trying to sell you something at some level, which, I think it's a horrible segue, but I could have this conversation with you for about 4 hours. As we're running out of time, please tell us where we can get your book, because it's clear in the conversation that there is a lot of integrated information and strategies that we're just simply not going to cover in a 1 hour conversation. So where can we find you? Not like your home address, but your book, and get in touch with you.
If people do want to come knocking on my door angrily, how philosophy's ruined their life, I empathize with that completely. Welcome the existentialism with warm arms. So my book you can find on Amazon. You can find it on Walmart online and Barnes and Noble online. So the book is called Fitlosophy. You literally just replace the phil part of philosophy and place fit on before it, because I love puns. By the way, my book has a lot of philosophy puns. There's me trying to be down with the kids. And you can also find me on my website. So
there's a lot of geeky material within the pages. That makes for a fun read. Okay. Definitely. I was thinking, how on earth do I make Kant enjoyable? Well, there's only one way, puns.
And you can find me on my website at fitlosophycoaching.com, as well as my Instagram, which is actually not related to Fitlosophy. It's basically my name, which is Sophie T, which is SOFITEE.
Thank you so much for that. When you were talking about people angrily rocking up to your door and just shouting all of their frustration with philosophy, I thought that would make a great podcast series or a sitcom, although you'll probably have to come up with the name of it. I don't think So Bob is a really great name for a sitcom. And you never said that I was going to be cast in the sitcom anyway, but would make for a really great sitcom. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for another episode. Sophie Thomas, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Visit us at theselfhelpantidote.com to share your feedback, insights, and recommendations on what topics you'd like us to explore in the future.